Warhammer 40,000 Renegades, Lord of Excess, by Rich McCormick. Chapter 11. Arcat scurried after the sophisticants, sword dragging behind him, all attempt to muffle its clanging against the stone floor now forgotten. "Wait!" he called at the back of a magenta-robed figure, as it started up the well-worn staircase to the cathedral's nave. "Is my brother with you?" he asked, and when he received no reply, he called out again, "I can help you!" "Stay back, boy," the broad-shouldered woman said over her shoulder as she made her way up the steps, keeping her body close to the wall and tracking an ornate lasgun back and forth. Arcat slowed slightly, surprised that the muscular figure had even responded to him, but he kept coming. "My brother is in the militia. He taught me how to fight. I can help you," he shouted. Cringed as he heard his voice bounce back off the ancient stone walls, reedy and nasal, a child compared to the strong, vital woman in front of him. "I'm serious, boy. Leave this to the 6th. We've got the angels on our side now." Arcat didn't know what she meant, but she laughed as she said it, though he didn't question further. What if she took him for an idiot? "Run along now. There's a good lad," she said in a patronizing tone that sent a spike of rage into Arcat's brainstem. He protested, wanting to fight his corner, and stepped forward, only to find himself face to face with the lethal end of a lasgun. "I'll shoot you myself. I mean it," the woman told him, her voice hardening. "We have lost a lot of people today. What's one more body to add to the pile?" Arcat stopped his advance, but held his ground, his breathing heaving in his pigeon chest. They stared at each other for a moment, separated by circumstances, gene enhancements, and many years of rejuvenate treatments, but both still children of Serene. The woman broke eye contact first. She tutted and jerked her head to the side, one final attempt to send the boy to safety before turning up the steps and disappearing out of sight. "She wouldn't have shot me," Arcat whispered to himself, drawing a deep breath to stabilize his shaking hands. He waited a time, allowing the adrenaline to move through his system, listening carefully until he heard the woman's bootsteps fade, heard her squad mates' voices dwindle as they communicated with unseen figures over the Vox, and he followed her. He climbed the stone steps as he had countless times before in his young life. He knew the places they were most worn down. He knew the markings carved into them over generations by the most rebellious of Serene's priests in training. He knew what was at the top. More rote learnings, more interminable study, more lectures from doddering old fools. But not today. Arcat crested the stairs and saw something wondrous, something from legend. An angel, resplendent in pink armor, imperious amidst a melee of dead and dying monsters and mutants. He was tall, taller than even the rejuvenated and gene-enhanced soldiers of the sophisticant synth, and beautiful, with an alabaster face that seemed to be carved from living marble. He was perfect, Serene salvation given flesh. The angel moved faster than Arcat thought possible, its two arms scythed so quickly they seemed to blur into four, a long blade carving furrows through the cultists that dared to approach such a holy creature. The blade rose and fell, swelled and arced, moving through the press of flesh around the angel, as if the people were wisps of cloud. They clawed and scratched at the luminous purple plate as they died, but their talons left no mark on the perfect armor, and the figure stepped over the corpses, as if they were not there. After all, what were devils to an angel of such beauty? A mask covered the lower portion of the angel's face, hiding any grimace of exertion or anger and creating a picture of pure serenity as it fought. Its eyes were bright and full of life, almost smiling despite the carnage it waltzed through. Only its hair belied its sheer speed. Lit by the midday sun through the broken door, it trailed after the angel like the tail of a shooting star, bright and beautiful, a memory of motion. One of the lumbering three-armed monsters came for the angel, swinging its huge sword two-handed in a wide arc that aimed to split him across the stomach. The angel caught the blow between the two sharp blades protruding from his wrist, and seemed to smile as he twisted into a spin. With one bladed arm he pulled away from the creature, pulling its three arms forward in the process, as if in supplication. He brought the other arm across the proffered limb, severing all three at the elbow. The creature bellowed in agony, and fell forward onto bleeding stumps. The angel lifted a long leg and placed a pointed boot on the back of its head, driving down with such force that Arcat heard the creature's skull crack. Its bellow became a wet gurgle. Arkat's sword fell from his hand to the stone floor. His fell too, tracing lines in the dirt smeared on his face before they dropped to the ground. He wrestled with doubts, but here was incontrovertible evidence of the divine, an angel that had stepped from the pages of his picture books, a statue of a god given life. What Nanny had said, what his father had said, what his brother had said, even what the doddering old Tumas had said, it was all true. Saviors weren't just a story, a way of imagining the Emperor, far off of his golden throne on Terra. It was prophecy. It was reality. Throne on Terra, he whispered to himself, as the puffed-up bravery of adolescence burst like a pricked balloon. His righteous fury disappeared in a moment, replaced by the fear and awe of a child. The angel finally stopped moving. It cast a glance around the cathedral, at the dozens of invaders, mutants, and Xenos that it had slain. Satisfied, it inspected his weapon, and took a moment to flick the blood from its blade. It begged to be worshipped, more than worshipped. Something so perfect should be adored. Arkat moved without thought before he was aware of his own intentions. He was on his feet, his eyes transfixed on the creature of legend. I knew, he called as he walked towards the angel, thin voice echoing in the charnel house of the cathedral. He ignored the stinking corpses piled high, enraptured by this figure of legend. It regarded him with those bright, shining eyes, its body finally perfectly still. He raised his arms as he came place, touched this being of light to feel its earthly form, reaching for his salvation to prove it was real. He believed, oh throne did he believe. He had wanted something else from his life. How naive, how wrong. He was born to believe, to be a priest, to proselytize. He knew that now. How could he not believe? He had seen his saviour in the flesh, and seen its perfection. Arkat heard the cut fast, the slice of the blade through the air like a sudden gust through Serene's park of princes on a blustery day. Then, like the soft pitter-patter of blood on the marble, like rain, he smelt it next, the iron tang of his life gushing from the ruin of his shoulder, and tasted it soon after, the chemical bloom of adrenaline, a panicked flush of saliva. He felt at last. It was a clean agony, pure and vibrant, hitting him all at once as if he had stepped into a new reality. It came with a new sensation, absence. He tried to move his arm, but how could he move something that was no longer there? He saw the limb on the church floor, skin the colour of his skin, wearing the sleeves of his robe. Presented whole, like an offering, he fell to the ground. Arkat realised that he never saw the cut that removed his left arm just below the shoulder. The angel had been too quick. For the first time, Cecily could remember. It was quiet in her head. The commanding voice that had driven her up to this strange city above the clouds had fallen silent. And in its place was stillness, utterly disorienting in its perfection. She heard nothing, not even the wind as it travelled through the arms and legs of the countless statues. They didn't talk. These white-faced men and women, they just stared, smiling, blank-eyed. The city was built for them, she decided. A world of opulence and expanse that wouldn't be stained by the filth and fluids of flesh and blood humans. She did not belong in the Overcity. She would never have come here. She wanted to go back down below. She wanted to go back to familiarity. She wanted her bunk and her shift and her family, and oh throne, she wanted to go home. She listened for the voice of the grass, aching to hear once more the tales it told between the soft swish of the blades. It had been a rhythm to her whole life, she realised, but its voice was dead to her now, too faint and too far away to hear from this lofty perch. The thought was too terrible for her to comprehend. She strained harder for any kind of comforting sound from home, searching her senses for some mote of familiarity. She heard nothing. No, not nothing. There was a sound, feeble and fading, but it was there. She closed her eyes and felt with her mind, feeling blindly towards the weak sound as if she was returning to her bunk in the dead of night. She found it. It was pain. The steps that had been lined with the dead now bore the weight of the living. Tired and dishevelled soldiers hefted sandbags and barricades into place, dismantling hastily erected firing positions. Others began the morbid work of removing corpses. Groups of 2s and 3s carried bodies of their compatriots and their mutant invaders, hefting them by clawed limbs and throwing them into ugly piles. They had been joined by the braver members of the civilian populace. Faces appeared alongside the placid countenances of the planet's statues, popping up on balconies or peering from behind pillars as the tide of the insurrection had turned. They were desperate for a glimpse of the angels, the rumours of whom had spread through Serene's powerful gossip networks. The planet's ruling families were scared for their own safety, but worse still, it would be the face lost if they were seen to have hidden while the Emperor's own returned from the stars. They had been rewarded for their bravery, catching sight of lurid figures in pinks and purples as they marshalled Serene's soldiery. Toricon, Vivisk, and the other adored from the initial assault at the Void Port were granted control of the Sophisticant Sixth, the elite force forming the thrust of the advance towards the cathedral. The telltale magenta robes of these broad-shouldered, rejuvenant-enhanced soldiers were spots of colour among the more drab colours of the city's regular planetary defence forces. The Space Marines had bolstered their assault with these shattered soldiers as they moved through the city, finding poorly trained men and women who had previously only dealt with minor inter-family conflicts and infrequent worker demonstrations quivering in their opulent barracks before press-ganging them back into the fight. Together they had been the open blade. The visible attack, while powerful and well-directed on its own, was designed to distract the foe from the true danger. That was the killing cut, and of course that honour had gone to Xantine. The appearance of this combined force, operating not only with the cooperation of the planet's best-known elite unit, but under the control of the Emperor's own Angels of Death, inspired an audible response among the civilian population. It was a low sound at first, like the babble of a distant river, but it rose quickly as it became apparent the insurrection had been driven off. As Xantine stepped out into the blazing midday sun of Serene's city above the clouds, it had become a roar. A city showing its appreciation, he basked in it, allowing the adulation to salve his wounds and soothe his strained muscles. He raised his right arm and palm to the sky, like a conductor in an orchestra, cut the sound with a sweep of his hand. Silence reigned. "Good citizens of Serene," Xantine shouted, the sonic projectors in his modified Mark IV armor working to transmit his booming voice to the mass of humanity that lined the steps of the Cathedral of the Bounteous Harvest. "Your ordeal," he let the moment hang, building suspense, "is over." He beckoned behind him, and Euratio and Orlan brought forward the woman from the stage. Phaedra followed at a distance, the slight figure somehow still bathed in shadow, despite the blazing sunshine. Whatever glamour the woman had employed had been stripped by the presence of a psyker as potent as Phaedra. In her place was a woman, no difference in appearance to the hairless workers that she had commanded. She struggled pathetically in the grip of the transhuman warriors, her skinny wrists held tight in pink gauntlets, her legs buckling as she was pulled forward. Xantine could not see the twins' faces. They were always hidden by silvered, mouthless masks, but their pleasure radiated off the both of them like a stench. The alien hissed as she was hauled out into the bright sunlight of Serene's midday, her slitted yellow eyes constricting as she was dumped onto her knees in front of the assembled hundreds. She flailed her clawed hands towards the sky in a futile attempt to ward off both Xantine and the sun itself, but to no avail. He simply battered them away and picked her up by the scruff of her neck, showing her to the crowd like a game bird. "Gaze upon your would-be conqueror," he shouted. The crowd booed and hissed. "This wretch has laid low your great city," he continued, derision on his voice. "This sea-nosed filth, this monstrosity, this weakling." He turned the creature around in his grip, looking into her alien eyes. They were wide with terror. "Pathetic," Xantine said to the alien, and spat in her face. He turned his attention back to the crowd. "Many thousands of you have laid down your lives today," he called, letting the Xenos fall to the floor and beginning to pace the great marble steps. "But I command you, do not remember this day as one of death, nor of sadness, nor of grief." He spun and cast a gloved finger at the crowd, commanding them. "No, you must remember this day as one of rebirth." He raised his arms again, a conspicuous attempt to copy the pose of the vast statue on the front stage of the cathedral behind him. "This world will rise from the ashes. Remember this day as one of power, as together we excised and destroyed the cancer at Serene's heart. And remember this day as one of glory." Xantine threw his arms wide, anguish clutched in one huge hand, "because this day brought me to Serene." Toricon proffered his saber, and Xantine brought it down on the alien's neck. Her hairless head bounced as it hit the marble, staining the white stone red. The cheers were loud enough to shake the ground that Xantine stood upon. The church was far too big and far too pretty to be compared to the places of worship in her city below, but it was still a church. Cecily was sure of it. The woman had gone inside, but this place was dedicated to the Saviour. The Saviour would protect her. Keeping low to avoid the soldiers on the stairs below, she scurried along the balcony, squeezing past the countless throne-cursed statues that seemed to be trying to block her path. She found a walkway that led to the cathedral's second story, one of many connection points between the old stone building and its newer neighbours. She found a door leading into the interior and tried the handle. A knobbly ornate thing of shiny black metal. It wouldn't turn. Come on, she hissed to herself. Putting a foot on the frame of the door, she pulled on its handle. She looked down at the pistol in her hand and covered her eyes as she pointed the muzzle at the crystal flex panel in the centre of the door. Squeezing the trigger, she was rewarded with the bark of a single shot, the tinkle of breaking glass. She squeezed through the gap, avoiding the coloured shards, stepped into the darkened space. Her eyes acclimatized to the relative gloom, and she realized she was on a deserted mezzanine that looked out across the interior of the cathedral. The plaintive sound was closer now. She couldn't hear it. Not with her ears, but she knew it was coming from below, even as it faded fast. She moved to the edge of the mezzanine, placing her hands against the intricately carved wooden balustrade depicting the cycle of the harvest, planting, tending, slicing, refining. There was a stink in the air, both sour and sweet. Incense, she could recognize, infused into the wood and stone of the ancient cathedral. It reminded her of her own worship, though this was much richer, more potent than the thin sticks the priest would light at her chapel. Even so, it was drowned out by another smell, one that also reminded her of the city below. It was the smell of the butcher houses. She had visited just a few of the blood-soaked chambers in the Undercity before, but she wouldn't ever forget the smell. They existed outside the law, black market spaces where workers could barter trinkets, blades, or bottles of refined sap for hunks of unspecified meat, something to add some variety to the endless grass-starch rations that barely filled hungry bellies. The cause of the smell was obvious. There were so many of them, and they were so still that she had mistaken them first for fallen statues. But the reek of dead meat made it clear that the cathedral was packed with corpses, dozens of them, hundreds of them, forming a macabre flesh carpet on the floor of the church. Then among the mass of dead things she saw movement, the smallest flicker of motion, like a twitch. The voice in her head nothing but a whisper in the dead silence. She followed the motion, made her way down the stone steps, picking past lifeless bodies and shards of broken glass, as long and sharp as threshing blades. She was grateful for her hard-wearing worker boots. Grandpa had given them to her. She found the boy between two dead things. She didn't recognize them. She didn't want to recognize them. They had too many arms, claws like something from a nightmare, and glassy yellow eyes that stared through her even in death. The boy's face was as grey as his cassock, the white material made ashen by the masonry dust and smoke that wafted into the cathedral from the explosions that breached the door. An arm lay by his side, the fingers curled, leaking blood from where it had been removed from its owner. It was his arm, she realized. Something was happening outside. She could hear the sounds of gunfire, wild and loud. She wanted to run, to hide, get away from the murderers and monsters that were terrorizing the dark mirror of her own existence. But she couldn't leave the boy. His eyes were fluttering as he drifted in and out of consciousness. She looked at the wound on his shoulder. No, wound was the wrong word. This was too perfect a cut, too precise. This was a dissection. He needed help. She had seen amputations like this before, when a threshing blade broke free, or when an inexperienced refiner stuck a hand into machinery to clear a blockage. He knew the shock might kill him soon, and even if it didn't, the blood loss certainly would. She made a decision. She tore a strip from his cassock, exposing bare feet and calves that were almost hairless, and wrapped it tight around the bleeding stump of his arm. She picked him up. She'd always been strong. You didn't get by in the refinery if you couldn't haul the sap barrels. But she was surprised how light he was. Truly, just a boy. She wondered it for a moment if she should take the arm as well, but thought better of it. He would be lucky if he survived the next few hours in a city under attack by mutants. The chances of finding a chirurgeon capable of reattaching the limb were next to zero. Outside, she heard cheering. Xantine had been near carried to Serene's senate, swept along by a tide of grateful humanity. "Please, Lord," one old man gasped as he struggled to keep up with the crowd. "What is your name?" "I am Xantine," the warlord said, and the word carried like a virus through the herd, until it was screamed by dozens, hundreds. Xantine had heard his name on the lips of mortals before. They had cursed it, or screamed it, or groaned it as they died by his hand. It had been a long time since he heard it spoken like this. The people of Serene whispered his name like lovers confiding in one another. They chanted his name, affirmations of survival, supremacy. They screamed his name in ecstasy, that their savior had finally arrived, just as prophesied. He revelled in the sensation, accepting the adulation like a narcotic. Just like a narcotic, it dulled his senses. The young woman grabbed for his bladed vambraces, and Sejanth hissed at the touch. He turned with murder in his eyes, but he pulled the blow when he realized she was holding out a bouquet of flowers. Her eyes were wide with terror. Xantine could only see the colours of the flowers. Pink and purple bloomed in from vivid green stems. A vision of delicacy set against the day's savagery. "For you, my lord," she whimpered, hands shaking. "My father grows them for the nobles, but I think you should have them because you... tailed off, flowers still outstretched like a weapon. Xantine accepted the bouquet with a bow. The woman melted back into the crowd as they moved through streets lined with fallen figures, many missing limbs, all blown into their constituent chunks. The white dust of destroyed masonry and marble covered every surface, and Xantine could only tell statue from corpse by the distinctive coppery tang of blood in his nostrils as he was ushered past. He felt tiny spikes of sensation as he moved amidst the human wreckage. It was pleasure. To be so close to death always ignited a flash of excitement in his soul. But it was also pain, he realized. The pain of something beautiful destroyed. It was a pain he knew all too well. Serene was a cracked reflection of harmony, a shadow of that beautiful place. But being here still conjured images of the adopted home of the Emperor's children. The home was gone now, destroyed when Abaddon, the vulgar brute, had cast a spear into the heart of Harmony's canticle city. In doing so, he had robbed the galaxy of its cultural and artistic pinnacle. Chemos had been that pinnacle before Harmony. Fulgrim had spoken to his sons of his homeworld, describing a drab, dull place with a population of dead-eyed drones. His coming had elevated the planet, the application of his singular genius making it not only an effective and efficient manufacturing world, but also a cradle for artists and artisans. Chemos was a paradise, standing alone as a jewel in the nascent Imperium. And then Fulgrim's wandering attentions had ensured that the gift of Chemos was squandered. The planet had been destroyed by those with no understanding of perfection, just as Canticle City had been. Xantine could not save his adopted home, just as his father could not save his. But Xantine could save Serene. He had saved it. Eventually they arrived at the great wooden doors of a building, with such opulence that it rivaled some of Canticle City's more drab districts. They swung open for him and his warriors alone, the throng of people behind him barred from entry by the sophisticate 6 soldiers in their magenta robes. Of Serene's human population, only the nobles and their coterie of servants were permitted to remain inside the chamber, and those that did try to chance their arm were beaten with lasgun butts or threatened with sabres until they fell back. Xantine had trailed a hand behind him as the doors closed, his last connection to the crowd that had buoyed him and fed him their adulation. You could hear them outside still, their raucous celebrations, only now starting to die in volume as the great wooden portal of the Senate was shut upon them. The nobles inside provided a much more reserved welcome, many of them having seen firsthand the unsettling appearance and uncanny abilities of the adored. Nonetheless, their presence as guests of honour demanded that the Space Marines have pride of place at the huge banquet table that ran along the centre of the chamber. Xantine had been seated close to the head of the table, in a chair that would have been ostentatiously huge for a standard occupant, though it managed to just about support his armoured frame. By humans' standards, the victory feast was lavish. Centuries-old bottles of Amasec were uncorked, ceremonial songbirds were slaughtered by the hundred for inclusion in elaborate pastries, and serfs in Serene's customary brightly coloured robes danced for so long that many of their number slumped to the floor mid-song, too exhausted to continue. For Xantine, whose stretched neuroreceptors had taken in a whole galaxy of sensation, it was all quite dull. I hope this is to your liking, my lord, a pinched man asked from over Xantine's shoulder, handing him a goblet of wine. Xantine took it. As guest of honour, he had been assigned a gaggle of cupbearers, food tasters, and other serfs. The pinched man appeared to be their leader. There had been an obvious interest in Xantine and his chosen escorts, Toricon, Vivisk, and the twins, as they entered the chamber. The presence of the huge angels of death in pink, purple, and golden armour filled the room with a strange charge that hovered between excitement and terror. To compensate for the sensation, the lords and ladies reverted to the preferred pastime of career politicians the galaxy over, gossip. They stood in huddles together, or leaned conspiratorially between their seats, discussing the power vacuums left in the wake of the uprising, while they eyed the terrifying newcomers. One larger man stepped forward. He had climbed the stairs to the Senate's upper levels, and his blonde hair was stuck to his pink forehead with sweat. He was trembling. Xantine noticed from both exertion and from fear. Nonetheless, he threw forward a hand. I am Pyrod, your humble servant, the man said. Xantine looked at the hand for a moment, like a snake sizing up a meal, before inclining his head slightly. Pyrod coughed and withdrew his hand, sliding it backwards through his mop of blonde hair with feigned nonchalance. My lord Xantine, I am honoured to have the pleasure. We spoke earlier today. It was I who called you to this world. Then I should express my thanks, Xantine said. It is quite the jewel. Their attention was drawn by sound, as the great chamber's doors were flung open. From outside, Xantine could hear the cheers of the populace, previously aimed at him, finding a new target. The sound rose like a wave as the governor entered the room, flanked by 16 members of the city's elite guard. Like them, he had changed into a magenta robe, but his had been trimmed in gold, denoting his position. He was met with a standing ovation from the assembled council members. Lord Durant waved to the room with feigned humility and placed a hand on a soldier's shoulder, steadying himself as he stepped up onto a cushioned litter. 4 of the robed soldiers stepped forward, bent at the knees and picked up the litter, moving up the Senate stairs with a practiced grace. The governor accepted the adoration of the Senate as he moved towards his seat at the pinnacle of the chamber, offering patronizing nods, or placing his hands to his heart as senators called his name and expressed their joy at his safe return. Pyrod, was it? Xantine asked the man, who jumped as he heard his name spoken. Yes, my lord? The governor. I wish to speak with him. Oh, of course, my lord. Let me speak with his attendants. We can arrange a formal introduction. No, you misunderstand me, Xantine said. I wish to speak with him now. Pyrod blustered for a moment, falling over his response. He found this warrior giant terrifying, but he had not been able to secure his own meetings with the governor, even after years of bribes and favours. But that was then, when he had simply been Pyrod. Now he was Pyrod, caller of angels. He cleared his throat and tried to fill his voice with a confidence he did not feel. My lord, he said, if you would follow me. Lord Durant, may I present Xantine of the... Pyrod turned to the Space Marine, unsure of how to introduce him. Even with Durant sitting in his colossal throne, Xantine loomed over the governor. He met the man's gaze, offering no emotion that might be construed as subservience. I am a child of the Emperor, Xantine replied. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Xantine, a child of the Emperor. How delightful to meet you, Xantine, Durant said. I had the distinct pleasure of being introduced to your fellow warriors earlier today. A terrible shame that they should have the opportunity to meet me during such unpleasant times. I do hope you'll convey my apologies. Xantine said nothing, sizing the governor up. Durant continued. I also met the enchanting woman who travelled with them. Will she be joining us for dinner? He asked. Xantine could smell his trepidation. Phaedra has retired to pursue other interests tonight, Xantine said. Splendid, Durant said, with obvious relief. Splendid. Well, I believe a toast is in order. The governor clapped his hands together once, twice, 3 times. With the third clap, the conversation in the room had fallen to a murmur, and their timely intervention. Turning to Xantine, he raised his goblet. 1,000 thanks for your efforts today, Xantine, child of the Emperor. Truly the Emperor smiles on us to send his most... He looked the Space Marine up and down, eyes lingering on the shaggy head of the alien beast on his pauldron. His most exotic warriors to our aid. These are dark times when mankind is riven across the stars, but your blessed presence reminds us of Serene's importance to the Imperium. Durant drained his glass, holding it out for a cupbearer to fill. Do you know, he continued, the corners of his lips stained red from the amasec, There is a legend on this world of a saviour who will return from the heavens in our hour of need to lead us to glory. Superstition, of course, but our only saviour is the Emperor on Terra. But your arrival reminds me of the story, and warms my heart. Truly, you have saved us. Durant waited for the applause to die down. Please, he said, bowing slightly, convey our thanks to the Lords of Terra when you leave. Leave? Xantine whispered, echoing the governor. It became a question as it rolled on his tongue. He opened a vox channel to Vivisk with an imperceptible movement. His old friend's voice vibrated the bones of Xantine's ear. Xantine pictured Vivisk with his cadre of noise marines standing ready to level key structures in the city. He was just waiting for the signal. He thought also of Lordling, leading the slave masters into the city's warren of residential streets, licking his slit lips as he thought of corralling thousands of humans into the exhortation's pens, of Sarkwell already dispassionately counting the spoils of this ransacked planet, its art and culture and beauty rendered down into their constituent parts for mindless consumption. He thought of the fallen figures outside, toppled things of masonry and human meat, the remnants of a world striving for some appreciation of perfection in an ugly galaxy, a world that appreciated him. He would not make the same mistakes again. He would make it right this time, make it perfect. Xantine turned to Lord Durant, eyes wide, in mock surprise. Why would we leave? The governor smiled for a moment, waiting for the joke to unfurl. When the punchline did not come, his mouth worked, forming shapes without sound. Eventually, words came out. What do you mean? Xantine addressed Durant directly, but projected his voice, using his surgically augmented throat to ensure all the banquet attendees, from kitchen porters to Durant himself, could hear his words. Why, my decision to stay on this world should come as no surprise to you, my good man. Your story was prophecy, one that I now fulfill. I have come from the heavens to your world, and I have found it lacking. But I will not destroy it. I will save it. Rejoice, Xantine has come. But my lord, Durant said, a confused smile still flickering on his lips. These statues, the saviour, these are myths. The statement drew gasps from some of the banquet's attendees. Most present saw the saviour as a foundational legend rather than a real figure, but to deny his existence remained gauche, even in Serene's most rarefied circles. Durant continued, I am the governor of Serene, he said, voice finally hardening as he realized the gravity of the situation. My family was chosen by our blessed emperor to serve his interests. We alone have the right to rule the citizens of this most valuable world. Tell me, Xantine said. Open palm pointed at the governor's throat like a dueling rapier. If your rule is absolute, how did your own people rise up against you? People? Governor stammered, wrong-footed by the direct question. They were not my people. They were dwellers of the Undercity, citizens in name alone. They are not fit to grow the harvest. They are fit only to grow and harvest the grass. They lack the sophistication and intelligence to rule. They seemed to disagree, Xantine said. They were enthralled to a monster, the governor said. Yes, a peculiar malady among your sort. Xantine cast a pointed glance around the room, his turquoise eyes taking in the accumulated mass of hereditary nobles and power-hungry social climbers. I have decided to stay on this world, to guide it into perfection. Serene has been failed by its leaders. Its people deserve a leader of character, of honor, of skill. You are a decadent and ineffectual collection of dilettantes who deserve nothing more than the glory of death at the tip of my sword. There was a ripple of sound among the attendees, an intake of breath that clearly titillated Pyrod, who stifled a giggle. Xantine gestured at the large man. Only Pyrod here had the presence of mind and quickness of wit to aid his planet, his people. As such, he will serve as my governor, my representative in matters of state as I preside over the creation of a just society. Him? Durant spluttered, incredulous. He is nothing, a puffed-up secretary. You cannot replace me. I will simply not allow it. Durant pointed a trembling hand at the giant. Guards, arrest this thing. The soldiers started to move from their position at the side of the chamber. Without looking in their direction, Xantine raised the pleasure of the flesh and shot them. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 skulls opened in turn, brain matter and bone fragments spreading like flower petals before they splashed over the robes and gowns of the banquet attendees. Burgundy on white, pink and magenta. There were screams from the guests, piercing sounds that caused Sajant to stir from her restful state. "Is it to be pain, my love?" she breathed softly. "It is," Xantine thought back. "Good." He sighed, contented. Xantine traced a gauntleted hand down Durant's cheek. It had drained of colour. He affected a theatrical whisper, loud enough that the chamber could still hear every utterance. "My dear, your own people have turned against you. A ruler must be loved. Listen to the crowds outside. They do not love you. They love me. How could I let you remain in power?" Durant quivered as the huge hand stroked his cheek. The touch was surprisingly light. You rule us. This is madness. Why would you come from the heavens to save us, just to subjugate our world? Xantine backhanded Durant across the face. The blow twisted the man's head so fast that it ripped loose from the meat of his neck, launching it upwards from his shoulders as if it was taking off from orbit. Only the connective sinew of the spine kept the skull from flying free, asserting the travel of his head and allowing gravity to work its effect. Durant's head came to rest on his own shoulder, cocked to the side. Dead eyes regarded Xantine with a quizzical look. He turned to the Senate. All whispers silenced. "Open the door," he shouted, pointing towards the ground wooden doors at the far end of the chamber. The image of the four-armed saviour was carved into the dark surface, his perfectly blank face offering no judgment. The remaining soldiers hesitated, and Xantine raised the pleasure of the flesh again. "Open the doors," he said once more, the demand spilling from his augmented throat and warp-tuned vox unit as a squeal. The gun pulsed in his hand, its warped innards thumping a thrilled heartbeat. There was no delay from the humans this time. Several soldiers stepped forwards, shaking hands, working locks and sliding bolts until the ornately carved doors cracked down the center, revealing the deep blue sky of an early evening. With the colour came sound, the cacophony of hundreds, screaming their pleasure at their continued existence into the sky. The volume rose further as the mass realized the doors were opening, not just opening, but opening for them. Xantine used his gifts to project his voice once more, to welcome his people into a chamber once reserved for those who put themselves above them. "Citizens of Serene," Xantine roared, "I throw open the doors of this celebration to you. Please, join us in our feast." A cheer convulsed through the crowd, and Xantine was pleased to hear his name was still on their lips. It moved organically through the mass, like a disease. "Xantine!" they bellowed, as words of invitation spread to the dozens in the first rows. "Xantine!" they whooped as others picked up the call, rallying cry for hundreds, for thousands. "Xantine!" they wailed as they pressed forward, as one entity, towards the slit in the door. The mass, finding the soldiers that had barred their way before too shocked to block them now, wrenched the wooden doors wide. The sight of the luxury inside drove the crowd into a frenzy, and they crawled and climbed over each other in desperate attempts to put themselves close to power, to say that they too had been there when their world had been saved. Bones broke and skin split as smaller and weaker members of the mass found themselves trapped under boots or against walls, but their cries were drowned out by the pulsing cheer of their friends and neighbours. "Xantine! Xantine! Xantine!" The mass burst through the doors and ran like water into spaces of the Senate chamber, filling corridors and walkways, climbing stairs and overturning tables as they went. They reacted to their surroundings with wide eyes, but adapted quickly. Some picked at golden bowls piled high with pastries, grabbed for trays of amasec goblets, or stopped worried-looking serving staff carrying plates of roasted meats. Others tried to engage Senate members in boisterous conversation, or sat in luxurious chairs designed for occupants of high breeding. The gathered nobles reacted as if these interlopers were vermin, hoisting their robes and standing on chairs in case one of the common folk should come near them, or thrown for bed, touch them. Some ran screaming for the exits, but found their way barred by yet more of the masses who had entered through the side doors and emergency escapes. Others had been rendered stunned by the death of the planet's governor, and sat blinking, ill-equipped by lives of luxury to deal with their new reality. Xantine pulled Durant's corpse by the hair and lifted it from his throne. He held it up with one hand, investigating the dead man's face. A weak chin, a bulbous nose, the almost imperceptible scars of a Chiragian scalpel along the hairline. Inelegant, ugly. Xantine threw his corpse down the stairs, watching with disdain as it tumbled over itself, limbs contorting until they came to rest on its back, broken neck hanging loosely over a step, lifeless eyes regarding the people that Durant used to rule. Xantine sat in the vacated throne and addressed his new subjects. The people of Serene deserve a better world. You deserve a better world. I will deliver it to you. He paused, drinking in the silence. It was born of reverence, perhaps, or fear. Either was acceptable to him. He continued. The whole crowd in the palm of his hand. Strength, skill, and talent will be rewarded. Any man or woman may challenge another for their place, provided that they can best them in an agreed challenge. He stood now, aping the vast statue of the saviour that hung over the chamber, arms raised to the side to accept their adulation. I will preside over these challenges and guide Serene to a new era. Xantine, the crowd murmured. The chant from before picked up again. Weep today for your pain, but be glad that your pain brought me to Serene, because I will bring a new society, a just society, a perfect society. The chorus began anew, and it filled his heart to hear it. Xantine, Xantine, Xantine. That was the end of part 1 of the book. It looks like we are about halfway through now. I really liked it, honestly. I liked the exploration of Arcat. I think the surprise that he experienced was very, it was unexpected. I didn't see it coming. I genuinely didn't see it coming. I want to know who that Space Marine was. Because it didn't quite seem like Toricon. So, but I don't think he was named. He's not been named before. I don't think we've ever seen like an Emperor's Children who was apparently beautiful but wearing a mask before. I like how human Xantine feels in this one. He just wants to do his best. He is deep down someone who wants to do well, to protect something, to have something and make it better. Which I think is very interesting for a Chaos Space Marine. But I think it also makes lots of sense for a member of the Emperor's Children. I can't wait to see where it goes. It's obviously all going to fall apart, because, let's be honest, they've set up a lot of conflicts between different characters, and they've also set up this society where anything can flip on its head. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see. I can't wait to see how it goes. I will try and get the next couple of chapters out sooner. I hopefully am going to get the whole thing finished by the end of the month. Hopefully. If not, early October. But yeah, I'm going to do my best to get like either a chapter out every day or a chapter out with almost every day, but with like a gap in between at least. Yeah, I hope you continue enjoying the series. I know I am. It kind of really makes me want to start collecting Emperor's Children, but I know that I shouldn't, because I know they've got their codex release sometime in 10th edition. But it's so cool. I've already like started to plan a kit bash for something I want to do. I want to try and make Xantine, and I want to make something that's inspired by Toricon, but not necessarily Toricon himself. Just because I think, yeah, I think it would be better to go for something that's just a creator, like a creation of Bile style thing. Like, yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I'm having a great time. I hope you are too.